Alright, well, Star Trek Into Darkness. It's finally out after 4 years. I'm so excited. Alright, so back when the last movie came out in 2009, I'll admit I wasn't really excited for the series to be rebooted. I wanted to see it rebooted. I was really wanting to see a new Star Trek film up to date and everything. But I just felt like it was going to be really weak. I didn't want them to try to make a quick buck off it. That's what I assumed it would be. Big surprise to me when I watched it, ended up thinking it was one of the best movies in the franchise. I get that it wasn't really cerebral, and that some people actually had problems with that, but while I'll get more in depth in that later, I just want to say screw off to those people. It was a joy to see the crew come together for the first time like that, and while the villain of the story, okay, he was nothing but fodder for the Enterprise to go after, but what created the story, what made it interesting, was how well designed the characters were and how their relationships were with each other, especially that of Kirk and Spock, which is a hallmark of any original series Star Trek plot, which is something else I will be getting into later. So needless to say, I've been waiting patiently for the sequel for quite some time, and apparently so has everyone else. So, was the 4-year wait ultimately worth it, or did J.J. Abrams make the biggest mistake he ever made spending so much time on the script? Alright, well, I'm going to stop this right here. The wait was completely worth it. This is without a doubt, in my mind, the best Star Trek movie to come out, and it is running for my favorite movies of all time. That's saying a lot. That's up there for me with Dark Knight, Dark Knight Rises, Empire Strikes Back. I really like this movie. The one before it was great, that's for sure, but this one was the one that me and my dad had dreamt about when we would watch First Contact and talk about how awesome it would be to see a Star Trek movie in modern times. So much was done right in this movie. The characters felt so perfectly crafted, the story perhaps the best of its kind, the action left my jaw just hanging. Excellent action. It's not the main focus, but it's something worth saying. Literally every aspect of this movie is just screaming excellence, and it makes me so giddy to know that all these years I've been just screwing around, waiting, thinking about what would be next. It paid off. It was just a worthwhile wait. Just going to put that out there right now. So it sort of bothers me that I'm hearing some surprisingly negative feedback from critics about this movie. Don't freak out though, the public seems to know the truth because consumer comments all seem to agree that this movie is awesome. And while I don't typically care about aggregator sites like Rotten Tomatoes, they all seem to actually agree with me in that Into Darkness is a great movie. Alright, so before I get into my problems with stupid people, let's actually talk about the movie. Star Trek Into Darkness takes place not long after the events of the last Star Trek movie. The original crew is now fully integrated into the USS Enterprise and are starting to deal with missions like the original crew does. And that's breaking the rules and doing what they think is best, even if it goes against the Prime Directive. And when I say they, I mean Kirk. So Kirk became captain of the Enterprise after saving the Earth in the last movie, so he's been riding on a bit of a high lately. He's got the command he's always been meant to have, and he's dealing with things in his cocky, shoot first, ask questions later kind of way. But, as I've heard said before, and to some extent, I do agree with, is war heroes don't necessarily make for good leaders. Remember, this is the alternate timeline Kirk, who has all the cockiness, but none of that military sense of respect he would have gotten from his father if he had still been alive. This movie really shows us what happens with Kirk when he gets thrown his hardest things to deal with prematurely in his life, which is what this alternate timeline has caused, with the destruction of Vulcan, the loss of his father. It's a really interesting take on it. Fairly early on in the movie, something major happens that just unravels Kirk and really sets up the story. I'm not going to say what it is. That is a pretty big spoiler. I'll just say that what happens stays with Kirk for the rest of the movie and basically becomes the drive of the rest of the story. JJ really got deep with it this time. In the last one, the story itself wasn't necessarily deep, which it doesn't have to be a good film. I just want to put that out. I don't think it has to be this excellent, in-depth story to be a good film. There's multiple aspects of a film, and if the story is okay and there's other aspects of it that are good, it can make for a good film. And the last one wasn't that deep. It was primarily focused on the characters having to form relationships and grow into their destinies. Sort of like The Avengers, actually. Which I also thought was a good movie. This one, though, had to move past that, because that can only really be done once at that level. Now we needed to see the characters progress as characters through their experiences on the Enterprise and dealing with real dilemmas, and man, do we get that here. Now, I was going to save all my critic issues till the end, but this one just fits so well right here, I'm just going to include it. One of the things that critics have been saying about this movie that bothers me is that they're saying it's not very deep. That it's just a fun summer action flick to be forgotten when the next one comes out, and that's just not the case. This whole movie is about personal vendettas and justice, and at what point have you crossed that line? Without trying to spoil anything, the movie gives us a parallel between 4 characters: Kirk, Spock, John, and an admiral named Marcus. Through these characters, we get some really important issues about us as people dealt with, such as at what point are the actions we take and the person we've become a good person or a bad person, and what makes you truly you. Do the outward circumstances determine the personality and essence of the person, or does the core characteristics and ethics of a person determine the circumstances that the person allows himself to be in? The whole movie is basically the story thread of Harvey Dent in Dark Knight. You either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain. It's about seeing just how dark people will let themselves become. This is actually similar to the premise of the new Iron Man 3 movie, which is a great movie, which is, as you'll find, is surprising for me to say. I'm not a big Iron Man movie fan, but I did like Iron Man 3, and I will review it, but not right now, and it's not nearly well as done there as it is in the new Star Trek movie. We see this comparison done flawlessly as we watch these 4 characters play out their parts. Each of the 4 shows a different reaction to personal injustice and pain. I don't want to get too in-depth into it, because that would really enter spoiler territory, but hopefully this was enough to really get people to see that there's depth in this movie. And it's just because it really bothered me when I saw this movie being called a simple action flick, which there's nothing wrong with. Nothing wrong with an action flick. Independence Day, love it, right here. Action flicks are fine. But this simply was just not one of those movies. That was just not the case with Into Darkness. You wouldn't call The Dark Knight Rises a simple action flick just because it has action. So don't call Star Trek Into Darkness a simple action flick either. This movie hits it from all angles. We get bombarded with a great story, backed by some of the best acting I've seen in a good long time. Seriously, Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, and Benedict Cumberbatch completely kill it as their characters and convey some of the most intense emotions I've seen come across the big screen since I Am Legend. The movie ends with a bang, too. The last 20-30 minutes of it's actually where most of the intense character stuff is happening. Something happens at the end, for instance, that just rocks Spock's world. And right there, we see him go through a metamorphosis that took Spock Prime years to achieve, and in a far less severe manner. By the time the movie was closing, I had to check the time, because I had no idea that 2 hours and 12 minutes had already passed. It's just been such an intense ride. I had no idea how much time had passed. The movie is incredible. Anyone who is any form of a Star Trek fan should absolutely adore this movie, even if you had problems with the last one, which I'm going to mention it later, but I am actually a huge Star Trek fan. I've seen a lot of the old original series. I've seen Next Generation. I've seen a little bit of the others like Voyager and Enterprise. I haven't really seen any Deep Space Nine. I've seen all the movies. I'll mention it later, but yes, I am actually a Star Trek fan before the J.J. Abrams stuff. I just love the J.J. Abrams stuff too. So yeah, if you're a fan of Star Trek of any form, you should love this movie. Even if you had problems with the last one, because I would say any problems you had, which I would say are stupid, are resolved. If you're new to the series, if J.J. Abrams movies are the only ones you've seen, then you'll still love this movie. It still will cater to you. If you're new to Star Trek just completely, you don't have to have seen the last Star Trek movie to really get what's going on. pretty much anything that happened in the last one that's important to this one is mentioned at some point in this movie. So it's okay, you can just go straight to the movies and watch this one. You don't have to go back and watch the 2009 one. I recommend it, it's a good movie, but you don't have to. Basically, if you like great storytelling, great action, and just plain great movies in general, do yourself a favor and watch this movie. Oh, also, if you're actually an original series fan coming to this movie, do yourself a favor and do not look up anything on the plot whatsoever. You will hate yourself and the internet forever for spoiling it for you. I went to this movie not knowing a thing, and that was just the best decision I've ever made.